Descend 200 meters into the freezing ocean. The sunlight vanishes rapidly. The surrounding water pressure climbs to crushing levels. A nuclear submarine slips silently into the pitch-black abyss. It will not break the surface again for 90 continuous days. Inside this sealed metal cylinder, 150 men prepare to disappear. They inhabit a steel tube. They have zero access to the atmosphere. If you seal humans inside a standard office building and cut off the ventilation, they suffocate. The breathable oxygen depletes rapidly. Toxic carbon dioxide builds up. The occupants die in a matter of days. A submarine faces this exact biological clock. The crew breathes in oxygen and exhales poison constantly. The hull provides a formidable barrier against the ocean, yet that barrier locks the crew inside. To survive, the submarine must forge its own atmosphere. It must manufacture breathable air from the surrounding hostile environment. It must replicate the life-sustaining conditions of the surface while buried deep underwater. This requires brutal, relentless mechanical engineering. It demands volatile chemical reactions running non-stop. If any of these internal systems falter, the crew faces asphyxiation. The dark ocean will crush the steel hull eventually, but the invisible gases inside will kill the men long before the hull yields. The first urgent requirement involves finding a source of breathable oxygen. You cannot store enough compressed oxygen tanks to sustain a crew for 3 months. The physical space required does not exist. The engineers must extract oxygen directly from the surrounding ocean. This solution relies on raw electrical power running hot. Extracting oxygen from seawater triggers an immediate, highly volatile threat. The process is aggressive and unstable. The crew must balance on a razor-thin line between breathing and detonating. The ocean provides an infinite supply of raw material. Water consists of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. The submarine extracts seawater and processes it through a high-voltage machine called an electrolytic generator. This heavy, humming industrial unit applies a severe electrical current directly to the purified water. The electrical shock shatters the molecular bonds holding the water together. It splits the liquid violently. The machine harvests the oxygen and vents it directly into the ventilation ducts. The crew breathes. The immediate threat of suffocation recedes. The nuclear reactor provides the immense electrical current required to sustain this aggressive chemical fracture. As long as the reactor burns hot, the submarine possesses an infinite supply of fresh oxygen. The men draw deep breaths. The air smells slightly metallic but sustains life. This brute force electrolysis solves the primary biological requirement. However, this aggressive chemical process yields a terrifying byproduct. The machine produces oxygen, but it also generates vast quantities of pure hydrogen gas. Hydrogen is a highly reactive, incredibly combustible element. It is the exact gas that destroyed the Hindenburg airship in a roaring inferno. The generator pumps out 2 parts of explosive hydrogen for every part of oxygen. If this volatile hydrogen leaks into the enclosed submarine atmosphere, it creates an invisible bomb. A stray spark from a closing metal hatch or a short-circuiting electrical panel will ignite the gas. A hydrogen explosion inside a sealed pressure hull will incinerate the crew. It will rupture the steel plates. To prevent this catastrophic detonation, the submarine must immediately expel the hydrogen outward. High-pressure compressors gather the volatile gas. They forcefully pump it overboard into the surrounding ocean. The hydrogen bubbles dissolve in the salt water far behind the churning propeller. The explosion risk neutralizes. But managing oxygen is only half the respiratory battle. The crew continuously generates an invisible, suffocating enemy. Every time a sailor exhales, he expels carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a toxic metabolic waste product. In a sealed environment, this gas accumulates with terrifying speed. Atmospheric air contains less than 0.1% carbon dioxide. If the concentration inside the hull reaches just 3%, the crew experiences severe physical degradation. They suffer aggressive headaches. Their vision blurs. Their breathing becomes rapid and shallow. If the concentration climbs to 10%, the men lose consciousness. Death follows swiftly. The submarine must continuously scrub this lethal gas from the recirculating air. Engineers employ a complex chemical absorption system called a carbon dioxide scrubber. This tall cylindrical machine utilizes a liquid chemical solvent called monoethanolamine. The crew simply calls it liquid amine. The ventilation system pushes the contaminated air forward. The exhaled air rushes through a fine mist of cold liquid amine. The amine possesses a high chemical affinity for carbon dioxide. As the air passes through the mist, the amine aggressively binds to the carbon dioxide molecules. It strips the poison out of the air. The scrubbed, clean air flows back out into the crew compartments. The liquid amine acts as a chemical sponge, but a sponge eventually saturates. Once the amine absorbs its maximum capacity of carbon dioxide, it becomes useless. It can no longer clean the air. The toxicity levels will spike. To reuse the solvent, the scrubber must execute a violent thermal purge. The machine pumps the saturated amine into a secondary chamber. Electric heaters boil the liquid, raising its temperature to over 100 degrees Celsius. The intense heat forcefully breaks the chemical bond between the amine and the carbon dioxide. The heated amine releases the toxic gas. The machine vents the concentrated lethal carbon dioxide overboard into the crushing ocean depths. The rejuvenated amine cools and returns to the scrubbing chamber. The cycle repeats endlessly. Yet, this continuous scrubbing requires an enormous, uninterrupted supply of ultra-pure fresh water. The submarine operates in a vast ocean, but the crew cannot drink a single drop. Seawater is toxic to the human kidneys. It induces severe dehydration, organ failure, and rapid death. Furthermore, the nuclear reactor, the oxygen generators, and the amine scrubbers require thousands of gallons of pure, distilled water to function. The submarine must manufacture its own freshwater supply. It relies on a flash evaporator. The evaporator pulls in cold, salty ocean water. It pumps this brine into a specialized vacuum chamber. In standard atmospheric conditions, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, but inside this vacuum chamber, the pressure is artificially lowered. This extreme low-pressure environment forces the seawater to boil at a much lower temperature. The water flashes instantly into hot steam. The heavy salt remains trapped behind. The marine impurities do not evaporate. They pool into a dense, toxic sludge. The machine pumps this waste sludge back into the ocean. The pure steam rises and strikes a series of chilled metal coils. The abrupt temperature change forces the steam to condense back into a liquid state. This yields ultra-pure distilled fresh water. The ship produces thousands of gallons of this vital liquid daily. The crew drinks it. The galley uses it to prepare meals. The reactor uses it to generate high-pressure steam for the propulsion turbines. The submarine has successfully established a breathable atmosphere and a sustainable water supply. The basic biological requirements for survival are met. The steel tube acts as a self-contained artificial biosphere. However, maintaining this fragile ecosystem introduces a terrifying, localized threat internally. The air inside the submarine is far from clean. It is a chemical soup. Breathing oxygen and exhaling carbon dioxide are only the most obvious respiratory functions. A submarine is a densely packed industrial facility. The hull contains miles of electrical wiring, gallons of lubricating oil, harsh cleaning solvents, and specialized paints. All these synthetic materials continuously off-gas. They release microscopic toxic fumes directly into the sealed atmosphere. The crew themselves emit methane and trace amounts of carbon monoxide. Cooking oils vaporize in the galley. Small refrigerant leaks release toxic freon gas. Without continuous aggressive purification, this toxic chemical soup will slowly poison the nervous systems of every man on board. The oxygen generator ignores these trace contaminants. The carbon dioxide scrubber ignores these trace contaminants. The submarine must deploy a brute force weapon to obliterate these complex chemical compounds. This machine is the catalytic burner. It does not absorb chemicals, it incinerates them. The burner draws the contaminated cabin air into a specialized heating chamber. It superheats the air to an agonizing 315 degrees Celsius. The complex, toxic molecules fracture. The air then passes over a heavy catalyst bed made of rare metals. The intense heat and the catalyst trigger a violent oxidation reaction. The burner chemically burns the carbon monoxide, the freon, and the synthetic hydrocarbons. It breaks them down into harmless water vapor and basic carbon dioxide. The amine scrubber later removes this residual carbon dioxide. The air emerges purified and safe to breathe. But this machine introduces a catastrophic, localized hazard. You have a superheated 300-degree furnace operating continuously inside a cramped, highly pressurized steel tube. If the internal insulation degrades, the outer casing of the burner will overheat. It will ignite nearby wiring. A fire on a submerged submarine is the ultimate, inescapable nightmare. Smoke fills the sealed compartments in seconds. The crew must balance on the razor's edge. They rely on controlled fire to keep the air breathable. But fixing the air does not fix the human brain. The atmosphere is stabilized. The men can breathe without suffocating. They can drink without experiencing renal failure. Yet, the ocean steals something essential that no machine can easily replicate: the sun. The submarine operates in eternal, absolute darkness. The human brain relies on the natural cycle of sunlight to regulate its internal biological clock. This is the circadian rhythm. Specialized photoreceptors in the human eye detect the specific blue light wavelengths emitted by the sun. This light signals the pineal gland in the brain to halt the production of melatonin, the hormone that induces human sleep. When the sun sets, the darkness signals the brain to release melatonin. The body prepares for rest. Inside the steel hull, this natural cycle is obliterated. There are no windows, there is no sunrise, there is no sunset. The men live under the relentless, harsh glare of artificial fluorescent lighting. The lighting remains static. The brain receives no external cues. The biological clock fractures entirely. The men experience severe circadian dysrhythmia. They struggle to fall asleep. When they do sleep, the rest is fragmented and shallow. They wake up exhausted. Cognitive function deteriorates. Reaction times slow down. Memory recall falters. To compound this neurological assault, military submarines traditionally do not operate on a standard 24-hour schedule. They divide the day into 18-hour cycles. This schedule breaks the human mind. A sailor stands watch for 6 hours. He spends the next 6 hours performing maintenance and training. He gets 6 hours for sleep. The day is compressed. The human body, evolved over millions of years to track a 24-hour planetary rotation, aggressively rejects this 18-hour schedule. The hormonal system spirals into chaos. The crew lives in a state of perpetual grinding fatigue. The lack of sunlight disrupts sleep. It also strips the body of a crucial, life-sustaining nutrient. When human skin absorbs direct ultraviolet radiation from the sun, it triggers a complex chemical reaction. The skin synthesizes vitamin D. This vital hormone regulates calcium absorption. It maintains bone density. It bolsters the immune system. In the lightless environment of the submerged hull, vitamin D synthesis crashes to zero. The body begins to deplete its stored reserves within weeks. If the deployment stretches into months, the physiological consequences become severe. Bones begin to weaken. The immune system compromises. Minor cuts refuse to heal rapidly. The sailors become highly susceptible to contagious infections. A single viral outbreak spreads with terrifying speed. Without the sun, the human body begins to eat itself. The submarine command must deploy aggressive countermeasures to replace what the ocean denies. They rely on heavy, engineered nutritional supplementation. The crew consumes fortified rations. The medical officer dispenses potent vitamin D tablets. The food supply becomes a critical medical lifeline. However, feeding 150 men for 90 days introduces a colossal logistical nightmare. The submarine possesses limited storage capacity. You cannot bring a sprawling agricultural farm beneath the waves. Every single square inch of the hull is dedicated to weapons, machinery, and sensors. The galley must store thousands of pounds of high-calorie, nutrient-dense food in an impossibly small volume. Securing this food creates an intense physical hazard. A submarine consumes provisions at an aggressive rate. The packing process is ruthless. Before the vessel leaves port, the crew loads tons of canned goods, flash-frozen meats, and dehydrated staples. They pack the food into every available void. They strip the cardboard packaging to save microscopic fractions of space. They stack heavy tin cans directly onto the deck. The men walk directly on top of the food stores. The cans form temporary false floors in the narrow passageways. As the cook depletes the inventory, the floor gradually lowers. The freezer room is packed so tightly that a man cannot step inside. He must reach in and extract the frozen blocks of meat in a strict, pre-calculated sequence. The galley itself is a cramped stainless steel closet. It operates continuously. The cooks work in grueling shifts. They prepare 4 full meals every 24 hours to accommodate the rotating watch schedules. They utilize heavy-duty electric fryers and convection ovens. Cooking in this environment is dangerous. A grease fire in the galley is a lethal threat. If hot oil ignites, it produces thick, toxic black smoke. The ventilation system will rapidly suck this smoke into the ductwork. It will distribute the lethal fumes to every compartment on the ship. The catalytic burner cannot process dense smoke. The crew will choke. The cooks must monitor the temperature of the fryers with obsessive paranoia. They feed the crew to stave off bone degradation and mental collapse. They operate a high-risk kitchen in a submerged pressure cooker. The food maintains the physical body. But the claustrophobia attacks the mind. The physical constraints of a submarine defy human nature. 150 men share a space no larger than a 3-story residential house. Privacy does not exist. The passageways are so narrow that 2 men must turn sideways to pass each other. The bunks are stacked 3 high. They are called coffin racks. A sailor has a few inches of clearance above his face when lying down. He sleeps surrounded by the relentless, deafening noise of the ship. The thrum of the engine, the hiss of the ventilation, the clatter of the galley. Silence is a myth. The isolation is profound. Radio communications are severely restricted. Transmitting signals reveals the submarine's classified location. The crew receives minimal news from the outside world. They receive short, heavily censored text messages from their families. They cannot send replies. They are entirely cut off from the surface of the planet. They live in a submerged steel purgatory. This extreme confinement breeds severe psychological friction. Minor annoyances escalate into fierce, suppressed aggression. A loud chewer, a strange habit, a misplaced tool amplify in the pressurized environment. The men must exert extreme emotional control. An altercation or a physical fight threatens the operational security of the vessel. The command structure enforces rigid, unforgiving discipline to maintain order. The crew channels their stress into relentless, repetitive drills. They practice damage control, they run fire simulations, they execute flood responses, they train obsessively to combat catastrophic failures. They prepare for the moment the machines stop working. The drills are not paranoia, they are rehearsals for death. The machines that keep the crew alive are highly complex. Complex machines break. The ultimate nightmare strikes without warning. A severe electrical fault cascades through the primary power grid. The main reactor initiates an emergency shutdown. The submarine plunges into terrifying darkness. The emergency battery circuits kick in, casting a sickly, dim red glow across the bulkheads. The immediate threat is not the loss of propulsion. The immediate threat is the loss of the atmosphere. The heavy electrolytic oxygen generators require massive electrical current. They die instantly. The high-temperature catalytic burners shut down. The amine carbon dioxide scrubbers stop pumping. The continuous chemical purification of the air ceases. The biological clock starts ticking loudly. 150 men are trapped. They sit in a sealed steel tube deep underwater, rapidly consuming the remaining oxygen and exhaling toxic poison. The captain orders the crew to rig for ultra-quiet. They must conserve battery power for critical sensors and life support. Every non-essential light is killed. Movement is strictly restricted to minimize oxygen consumption and lower the metabolic production of carbon dioxide. The men sit in the dim red light. They breathe shallowly. The air grows noticeably thick and stale. The temperature drops as the heating systems fail. The humidity spikes. Condensation drips heavily from the cold steel ceiling. The atmospheric monitors sound a sharp, piercing alarm. The carbon dioxide levels are climbing aggressively. The toxic threshold approaches. The scrubbers are dead. The crew must manually extract the poison from the air before it induces widespread unconsciousness. They deploy the emergency chemical reserves. They break open sealed canisters of lithium hydroxide. Lithium hydroxide is a highly caustic, dangerous chemical powder. It reacts violently with moisture. It causes severe chemical burns if it contacts human skin or eyes. The crew members don heavy rubber gloves and protective goggles. They carefully unroll large, thin sheets of fabric coated with the lithium hydroxide powder. They hang these chemical curtains throughout the cramped compartments. As the stagnant, contaminated air drifts over the fabric, the lithium hydroxide chemically binds with the carbon dioxide molecules. It strips the poison from the air in a crude, manual exothermic reaction. The curtains grow physically hot to the touch. The men sit in darkness, breathing shallowly, waiting for the engineers to restart the dead reactor. The manual chemical scrubbing buys them a few hours of life. If the engineers cannot reignite the nuclear furnace within that shrinking window, the lithium hydroxide will saturate. The toxic gas will overrun the final defenses. The crew's lungs will burn as the concentration crosses the lethal 10% threshold. In this lightless abyss, the men realize the ultimate truth of their existence. They do not fight the ocean.